House committee hearing into the Uvalde school shooting is about to begin. If we can take a live picture so we can show you that it's about to get underway. All right, you can see an empty meeting right there. But right now, let's talk about what the rest of this meeting is set to take place, what's set to happen behind closed doors in executive session as people outside hopefully are trying to file their way into the chambers here. Now, as far as today's meeting, it will be an executive session. It is closed door, but this is what they say is going to happen. Uvalde's Sheriff Ruben Nolasco will finally give his side of the story, giving his testimony behind closed doors via Zoom. Not in person, via Zoom. You could see people kind of filing their way in, taking a seat. Let's talk about last week. Last week, the committee chairman, State Representative Dustin Burrows, said that Sheriff Nolasco has refused to testify so far in the investigation. Nolasco released a statement to the Uvalde Leader News and wrote, quote, "I have nothing to hide. I'm not scared. A criminal investigation takes precedence," end quote. Let's listen in.
Clerk, call the roll.
Representative Burrows.
Here.
Representative Moody. Justice Guzman.
Here.
Okay, a quorum is present. Let me make a couple of... Representative Moody is here. He is appearing virtually today. Let me make a couple of comments before we do one procedural motion, and then we'll go into executive session. As a reminder, the Speaker of the House formed this committee to get accurate information out. We have interviewed almost 40 members and have been spending countless hours reviewing other witness statements and other audio files. Today, like we have done in the past, we're going to be interviewing witnesses in executive session. Today, we will interview people from the Alert Center, Department of Public Safety, and the Sheriff of Uvalde. Also, as a reminder, the Texas House has a substantive committee that will interview many of these same people publicly and make comments there. This committee has always said from the beginning that there needs to be a balance between getting some information out to the families, to Uvalde, and to the public, and also being thorough and accurate. While we could continue on and on and on reviewing things, we will continue to look today to see if we have enough information to get at least a preliminary report out there sooner than later so that people can start getting some information and seeing what it is that we are discovering. One of the things that I requested over the last several days is that part of our committee report have a video attached to it and made public. I want to remind you, this video would be of the hallway footage from the Robb Elementary School. It would contain no graphic images or depictions of violence. It would literally begin after the shooter enters the room and end before a breach of that room. The Department of Public Safety and the Mayor of Uvalde have both agreed to that. And the basis of, I can tell people all day long what it is I saw. The committee can tell people all day long what we saw, but it's very different to see it for yourself. And we think that's very important, and we'll continue to put pressure on the situation and consider all options in making sure that video gets out for the public to view. With that, I believe we do have a procedural motion. Members, the chair moves that the minutes from June 16th, 2022 committee hearing for the Robb Elementary Shooting Investigative Committee be corrected. Are there any objections to this motion? Chair hears none. Motion prevails. Members, is there anything we need to discuss before we go into executive session? Chair hears none, so without objection, the committee will now enter into executive session under Rule 4, Section 12 of the House Rules of Procedure at 9:03 a.m. Thank you all.
All right, this hearing has gone into executive session, as you can see there. Now, at first, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people, but if you noticed, he did say that a quorum is present. So that's what they need to go into executive session. Now, one thing that was mentioned was that video. So far, all we have seen is that one screen grab showing officers standing in the hallway with rifles and at least one ballistic shield. That picture right there. Again, it is only one small part of the 77-minute video. The Department of Public Safety agrees it should be made public. He talked about that as well, but the Uvalde County District Attorney continues to object. Now, we have Tony Plohetski here. Tony, you have seen that video. Talk about, he mentioned no graphic images will be shown, but talk about maybe the importance, why some people might think that seeing that video is pertinent. It's important.
Well, certainly, Yvonne, it is an unabridged version of the truth. It's not based on statements from law enforcement officers, but instead we can see with our own eyes, as you mentioned, I have, of that hallway video. And I just want to tell you, excuse me, that when it is eventually released, and I expect it will be incredibly difficult to watch. It is, I think, incredibly wrenching. One of the things that you see just from very early is the law enforcement response. Yvonne, you do see police officers run toward the gunfire upon entering the school, but then you hear an exchange of gunfire between the gunman and those law enforcement officers. You see the law enforcement officers actually being blown back. They run back. One of them actually checks his head to see if there is blood. But Yvonne, what is so striking to me is that after that, for an hour, you truly do not get a sense of urgency, and that law enforcement is treating this with the extreme, dire, and deadly situation that we now know was happening inside that classroom. For an hour, you watch as police officers walk into that school. You see over time that they are increasingly armed with assault rifles, with ballistic shields, with helmets. At one point, you see tear gas canisters being brought into the hallway. But again, you don't necessarily get the sense that they are rushing. It does not seem as though it is a frenetic situation. And again, one of the things that may account for that is that the DPS director, Steve McCraw, has said that police were treating this like a barricaded subject. That means it calls for a slower, often more methodical response. They did that instead of treating it as though this was an active shooter, which says police officers must do anything in their power to stop a shooter, even if it means surrendering their own lives.
But you can understand where parents and other people were saying, where did this breakdown in communication happen? How does this happen with officers who have extensive training? I mean, we take our kids to school with the assumption that they're safe and they're secure. And if something were to happen, that's what police are for. So I can understand both sides where they're thinking, why did it take an hour?
Certainly, and I think that as you watch that video, again, once it's ultimately released, that is going to be the question on the minds of I think everyone who watches it, that yes, there may be some level of explanations, but at the same time, I think as citizens and certainly as parents, I'm not a parent, of course you are, the expectation is that if a loved one or family member is in danger, that police act urgently and immediately to preserve life. Yvonne, we know, speaking of that as part of this investigation into what happened that awful day, that DPS and the Texas Rangers, again, who are leading this investigation, have brought in medical experts to try to determine whether or not lives could have been saved as this time bore on, again, for more than an hour. But I think, again, just to highlight the video itself, one of the things that is just so striking to me is just the sheer volume of police officers, as well as how heavily they are armed during that whole time.
So today, what we expect to happen is we expect possibly this video will be made public, right? The other thing is we're going to be hearing from, well, we won't be hearing, they will be hearing because it's executive session from Sheriff Nolasco. That's via Zoom. He's not going to be there in person. It's via Zoom. So hopefully we can get some answers from him on that. The committee will also be hearing invited testimony from other law enforcement officers. They also mentioned that they have interviewed more than 40 members.
Right, yeah.
I mean, they've interviewed, it's been an extensive interview process, and more witnesses will be interviewed today in session, right?
And one of the most key witnesses who we know testified in person is, of course, Pete Arredondo. He is the Uvalde School District Police Chief. Authorities have said that he was the incident commander inside that school that day, and so his testimony certainly could give officials insight into his thought process and how he was responding and why he was making the judgments that he was making that day as well. But again, the video essentially is going to show, once it's released, police officers gathered inside that school, but really waiting and walking, you know, kind of pacing around. And I think that
Urgency was needed.
Urgency was needed. And, you know, we have heard the director of DPS call the overall response that day an abject failure of law enforcement. And so I think once the public has a chance to view that video, again, it will really widen the lens, I think, in a very painful way of everything that happened that day.
Thank you, Tony. I know you're going to be on this as well. We have Dominic Newland out at the Capitol as well. We will be following the hearing throughout the day. You can get the latest news on KVUE Plus and KVUE.com. We will also be back on air for KVUE News midday.